Today, I am so excited to welcome the fabulous Sarah Hurwitz. So, from 2009 to 2017, Sarah Hurwitz served as a White House speechwriter, first as the senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, and then as head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. And prior to serving in the Obama administration, she was the chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton on her 2008 presidential campaign. She's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Oh my, what a triple threat she is. And she's the author of the incredible, because I read it start to finish, over 26 hours. It's called Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism after finally choosing to look there. Welcome, Sarah. We are so delighted to have you with us. And I just want to begin by asking you a question, okay? You went from being head speechwriter for Michelle Obama to writing a book about Judaism, sort of like from presidents to prayer. Please tell us about that journey. How did you get to the White House, and why did you decide to write a book on Judaism after you left?
Right. Well, first of all, I am thrilled to be here. I adore you, Adrienne, and anytime we can have a conversation is a good day for me. So thank you for having me.
Oh my.
It's funny. I grew up like I think, a number of American Jews grow up, where Judaism for me was these two boring services at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and a Seder, which I thought was boring. And I said, I became a bat mitzvah, and then I was like, I'm out. I'm good. Nothing to see here. If I want meaning or connection or spirituality, I'll just look elsewhere. Fast forward 25 years later, broke up with the guy I was dating. I had all this time on my hands, looking to fill time, not on a spiritual journey in any way, but I happened to hear about an intro class at the local Jewish community center, signed up on a whim just to fill my time, but I was blown away by what I found. So much wisdom about how to be a good person, how to lead a worthy and meaningful life, and how to find profound spiritual connection. And I was like, where has this been all my life, right? Like, where has this been? So I read hundreds of books. I attended silent Jewish meditation retreats. Those are a thing, for real.
Silent? Isn't that an
Silence.
oxymoron? Silent and Jewish?
Silent. Jews are silent for an entire week. It is very hard for them. There's like a lot of struggle. You can tell people are really, it's like just barely containing it, but I'm an introvert, so I love it. But, I found that, there were these great intro kind of nuts and bolts books, but there weren't really the kind of and there were these very sophisticated academic books, which I just was not really want to read. But I wanted a book that they translated for me the transformational, life-changing wisdom that Judaism has to offer just normal Jews like me, and also covers the basics so I can follow along. So that's what my book is. And it's been a joy. It's been fun just to connect with people from all different backgrounds. It's been a joy.
It's phenomenal. But how did you go? How did this trajectory happen? I mean, really, you had a plum gig, and a lot to be proud of, and certainly a certain amount of influence within the greater world. But there must have been some kernel that made you see that as an operating system or as a lens. There was something in Jewish life that would push you towards something so different.
Yes. What I've found is that so many of the answers that the secular world offers aren't that impressive, right? It's like secular ethics is like, you do you as long as you don't hurt others. The ethic of American law is like, don't assault people or steal their property or infringe on their rights, but generosity, compassion, kindness, wisdom, maturity, right? That's a thin ethic. The secular answer to getting married or having a baby or losing someone you love is a market answer. It's like, buy an expensive crib, plan a fancy wedding, buy a nice casket, but these are big personal life transitions, and we need support, we need community, we need wisdom. Secular world doesn't really offer that, right? And I was just finding that Judaism had such insights about how do you cope with adversity? How do you connect with God, the divine, when you're not sure about the idea of a being in the sky, right? If you're like, wait, I don't know, do I believe this, do I not? Judaism just offered so much, and I feel like so many Jews like me don't know any of that stuff, right? Nobody showed me this at the High Holy Day services. I never learned any of this stuff. And I want to share these deeper answers about how to be human with other people like me.
It's a phenomenal. Sarah, I was thinking that in this time that we're living in now, in many ways, Judaism is a religion of proactivity rather than reactivity. So we learn in order to be prepared for what is coming forward for us. So here you are in this time of COVID, sitting here with an arsenal of wisdom for living that wouldn't have happened had you not started that search some years back. I'm curious to know how that translates into a preparedness for this time. What are you using of the wisdom you learned to
Yeah.
sustain now?
So I'm using, I'm using a lot of the ethical wisdom. I think that a lot of the wisdom that Judaism has to offer about how we speak is very important right now, because how we communicate with others, we're not seeing people in person. So
Right.
the words you use over the phone, on Zoom, through email, they take on this really heightened importance. And I have to, we're stressed now, right? We're stressed, we're tired, we're anxious. And I think there's a real inclination to want to just snap at people and maybe kind of shame people a little bit. It's like, you're
Yeah.
quarantining that way. Well, you're an idiot. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in that person's life. So I think I'm finding that Jewish wisdom that says, just stop for a minute. Before those words leave your mouth, think, what's the impact going to be? If this little piece of gossip that you think is so harmless, if that spreads to 100 people, are you going to feel okay about that? Right? It's that little pause and thinking about how do you use your words. I'm also just thinking a lot about chesed, loving kindness, right? Which is, it demands a ministry of presence for us. It says that when someone is struggling, you got to show up for them. You get yourself to that bedside, you get yourself to that shiva or that funeral. Now, we can't do that now, right? Not safe. But how do we be just deeply, passionately present for people who are in need right now?
Wow.
Just how do we, right? And I heard about this beautiful, this very sad story of a woman who lost her husband of many decades to COVID-19. And, they couldn't do the funeral. And so she's talking to a rabbi, trying to figure it out. And she thought about the receiving line that traditionally happens at funerals, where the mourners walk through and their friends line up on either side and offer condolences. And she thought, how can we do this? They did it in their synagogue parking lot in their cars. They lined up 2 rows of cars and the mourners drove through and everyone waved and blew kisses from their cars. And I just thought, that is chesed, right? That is a way that you do that now. So it's like, how do we do that today?
You're absolutely right. I'm just going to segue back for a minute to being a wordsmith, since you were saying that there's so little that we can do physically, although, of course, that was a brilliant notion. But language becomes more and more important in how we speak. So what I need from you is to give us your very best tips for powerful, moving, inspiring storytelling, because I believe that we are all telling ourselves a story as well, whether we're sharing it with the outside world yet or not. That narrative inside of ourselves requires words that we use. So not just in big speeches, but even when you're writing emails or speaking to your family or in meetings, what are some of your biggest tips based on your expertise?
I mean, what you just said is so right on, right? Every time you said, telling a story isn't about giving a big speech to 30,000 people. Well, no one does. Very few people do that. But when you send an email, you're telling your story, right? When you talk to your family around the dinner table or you speak at a Zoom meeting, you're engaging in a narrative. So how do you do that well? My top 3 tips. The first tip is say something true. I think so often when we sit down to write an email or give a speech, we're thinking, okay, what will make me sound smart or funny or powerful? Or what do these people need to hear? Great questions. Absolutely your second and third question. But your first question needs to be, what is the deepest, most important, most helpful truth that I can tell at this particular moment? Just get really still with that question. And once you are clear on that, like what's really true right now, then you can think about, okay, how do I tell this truth in a way that people can receive it? Maybe I can't tell all of it. Maybe I need to kind of explain it. That's okay. But you've got to get really clear on what is really happening right now. You look at Barack Obama's 2004 Democratic Convention speech. The man stood up there and said, let's face it, my presence on this stage tonight is pretty unlikely. And he then went on to talk about his grandfather, who had been a goat herder in Kenya. There is no political consultant on the planet who in 2004 would have been like, Barack, talk about your Kenyan goat herding grandfather. They would have told him, no, hide that, say that you're from the middle of America. They would have said, but he said, no, that's not true. My grandfather herded goats. I come from an immigrant background like most Americans. I'm not going to hide that. He stood up and he told his story. And I think people were really moved. Right? They felt like, well, that's true. I trust him. Authenticity. So say something true. Second, talk like a human being. Oh, for the love, please. I don't know what it is, but the most dynamic, charismatic, funny, interesting people, they get behind a podium or a keyboard and suddenly they become very formal and they drop all this jargon. And you see these like CEOs who are like, we need to catalyze our platform to transform our leverage to, it's like, You have never turned to your husband and been like, honey, I think we should catalyze our platform to leverage our, like, what? Or you see these politicians who are like, we need to put hardworking American middle-class family values first. Have you ever turned to your girlfriend and be like, you know, girl, I just think we should put hardworking. I mean, if you wouldn't say something to one person, don't say it to many people. It doesn't get better, right? Like, I think so many people think I should talk like a salesperson, a lawyer, and they get, it's very uncomfortable. You see them speaking and they're like, good morning. It is a great pleasure and a great honor to be with you. Do you greet your colleagues like that in the morning? Are you like, good morning, friends? Like, no, you're supposed to just talk like yourself. Just if something feels unnatural coming out of your voice or it feels weird in your keyboard, don't do it. Go back and edit it and put in your own voice. And of course, you know, it's a little bit more formal than spoken conversation. Of course, you have to clean it up and make it grammatical, but do it in your own voice. And then finally, show, don't tell. And it's like writing 101. Everyone says, yeah, I know, but people often don't do it. If you're bored at a speech or with an email or with a memo or something you're reading, it's probably because someone's telling. Now, what do I mean? Here's the difference. The two versions of the story of my friend John. Version 1, my friend John is so uptight, so neurotic, so exacting, so precise, so anxious. Version 2, I left my friend John alone in my kitchen for 10 minutes. When I returned, he'd alphabetized my spice rack and was centering the magnets on my refrigerator with a ruler.
Stop talking about my husband. My husband.
I mean, I was using John as just I didn't want to, but yeah, this is about your husband, obviously. They want to say it, but if you want to out him, fine. But you know, that's like, if I call you tomorrow, will you remember the 5 adjectives or will you remember the images?
Oh my gosh.
And, you know, if you want a real life example of it, think about Michelle Obama's 2016 Democratic Convention speech. She didn't start that speech by saying, when I came to the White House, I was nervous, I was afraid, I was scared, I was worried. She said, on my daughter's first day of school, I watched them pile into those big black cars with those big men with guns. And I asked myself, I saw their little faces pressed up against the window. And I asked myself, what have we done? Right? Like you feel it. You're with her. She doesn't have to tell you I was scared, I was nervous. You feel it, right? She's showing. So and even if you're writing an email to your team at work, if you say you've all been working hard, I appreciate it, you're stressed, you can say, you know, I've seen those midnight emails from you. I've seen your kids running into the screen, looking frazzled. I see you trying to do the math homework and visual. I want the visual. I want to see it. So that's really what makes writing memorable.
Okay, just reiterate quickly on one foot
Yes.
those points, because I think people are going to want to write this down. This is so good.
So say something true, get really clear with the deepest, most important, and most helpful truth that you can tell.
Hold on 1 second. An ancillary question for that. Just for a moment.
Sure.
When you say something true, are we talking about a personal vulnerability?
What a great question. It can be, right? It can be. I oftentimes, when people say I'm a really nervous speaker, I'm terrified of public speaking, I can't do it. I often will say to them, depending on the situation, you know, you can actually own that and just get up and say, you know what, I got to be honest. Public speaking is not what I'm comfortable doing, but I'm here today because this is really important to me. And in that moment, you're kind of giving yourself a breath. You're making the audience kind of come towards you in compassion, right? That's okay. So I think it can be that kind of vulnerable truth, absolutely. But I also think it's sometimes there's something that's happening that everybody knows. And if you don't acknowledge it, it's kind of, everyone kind of knows the thing you're not really saying. And it's sometimes just best to say that thing. It might be like, you know what? Our company is really struggling right now. We're really on the edge. And I'm just going to be honest. And here's what's happening. Here's how we plan to move forward, right? It's just, you know, even like in a pandemic now, right? That communication of like, okay, here are the, you know, you see Governor Cuomo actually doing this quite a lot, where he sends this nightly newsletter where some of the news is very sobering, where he says, we've had this many cases, here's what's happening. It's hard, but then he says, and here's the great things that are going on. Here's our plans. Here's all these amazing people who are stepping up and helping out. Here's some spiritual wisdom for you. You know, he balances it, right? He does it very well that way. So I think that's what I mean by that. So say something true, show, don't tell, and just talk like a human being. Even better, talk like yourself in your own beautiful, gorgeous voice. Because then people they'll be comfortable. It will be comfortable. I promise.
I think these might be the 3 most powerful life hacks, even for communication, regardless whether you're writing or publishing or anything. So tell me, what about editing? I mean, obviously, life is timing and lighting and editing. So give me a little tip on editing.
One of my colleagues once said to me, you know, Sarah, your approach to speech writing is you dump a bunch of total nonsense onto a page and then you spend a week editing it into something pretty good. And I was like, okay, that's like, that actually is my process,
Oh
right?
my God.
My drafts are terrible. They're so bad. I can't even, they're embarrassing, but I edit my way to good writing. And I think a lot of writers do. That's actually really common. So my first best tip about editing, cut 10%. Just do it. Don't fight me on it. Just cut 10%. 100-word email, cut 10 words. 1,000-word memo, cut 100 words. You can do it in red lines. You can put it back. But what this forces you to do is it forces you to notice the weakest parts. You'll be like, actually, this section isn't that great. Or you'll notice, oh, wait, I said the same thing in 2 different paragraphs. I don't need it. So they're just cut 10%.
Wow.
Then figure out what you want to do with it, but cut it. My second thing is edit in a different format that you write. So if you are writing on your computer, print the thing out, edit it on paper, because your eyes, when you're reading the same thing on a screen over and over again, your eyes just dance over it after a while. You can't see it. Another thing, maybe if you're writing it on your computer, take your iPhone, email it to yourself, and just walk around looking at it on your iPhone. One of my colleagues in the White House actually used to do that with speeches. He would look at them on his phone. He'd go for a walk, and then he'd realize, like, oh, this part doesn't work. It jars your brain. If you need to stay on your computer, put it in a different font, in a different format, a different size. It's weird, but it actually does kind of jar your brain. And last editing tip is, if something you've written just doesn't feel good, it's probably in the wrong order, and that's an issue of structure. So oftentimes when I would write a speech and just think, oh, this is boring, it's not flowing well, I print the thing out, look at it. Just look at it. I look at the 5 pages and I'd start to realize, like, oh, wait a second, this paragraph that I have at the beginning, that's actually my conclusion. Or like, wait a second, I'm saying the same thing on page 2 and page 5. I can delete one. Or you know what, this thing on page 4, I think it'll be better on page 2. And you start to realize a better order for things. And then you end up cutting a lot of kind of awkward transition language that you have when you're trying to make it work when it's not in the right order. So I think reordering, structure, very important. That's important for editing.
One of the things that I found for myself is that if I read it out loud, if I print it and then read it out loud, I will often notice a ton of mistakes and typos and so on.
Yes, different format. That's exactly that's a very dramatic kind of different format, right? Where you're going from actually looking at it with your eyes to hearing it, and that's a really, really good one.
Okay, so what is the difference then between writing for things that are going to be read and writing for things that are going to be spoken? If you're telling your own story in a written form and you're assuming people will read it, or you're telling your story on a stage or even at a family meal, what's the difference there?
So different. These formats are so different. Now I'm just going to pause. I just said so different, period. These formats are so different. So different, period. That's a sentence fragment. That's not grammatical. If you saw that in written text, you would say, well, that's a sentence fragment, that something's missing. But when I said that, you weren't thinking, well, that was ungrammatical. Boy, Sarah, I can't believe it. But it sounded fine, because when you speak, writing that's meant to be heard, spoken writing, it's much more conversational. So when you're writing something that you intend to speak out loud, don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about punctuation. Worry only about how it feels coming out of your mouth. Does it feel comfortable? Does it feel natural? Can you say it in a way that you really feel in tune with it? So just grammar, punctuation, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But for writing to be read, for sort of written writing, grammar and punctuation do matter. They're actually pretty constraining. I find them, having gone from being a speechwriter to a book writer, that was very hard for me, to realize that I couldn't start every sentence with because, that I couldn't have just sentence fragments separated by ellipses. I was like, why are you constraining me, copy editor? It's not, it's very frustrating to me, but that, written language is much more, it's sort of more formal. So with written language, you do have to care about grammar and punctuation. With spoken language, just don't worry about that stuff. It's like, how does it sound coming out of your mouth? That's it.
It's so interesting because one of the things I find annoying when I listen to a speaker, they can be brilliant, articulate, erudite, and if they sound like they're reading out loud, it drives me nuts. It's just the language of, it sounds pretentious spoken. So when you were writing speeches, were you careful to look for creating a thought or an idea that the president or the first lady had so that it came across as not a homespun, but certainly so it lost that kind of pretentious academic vibe?
Gosh, yes. You've just articulated the beating heart of good writing. I think so often, like in the White House, as a speechwriter, you work with all these policy experts. And if you say to them, okay, what's our healthcare plan? They'll be like, okay, we're going to bend the cost curve, and then healthcare delivery as a percentage of GDP will fall. It's like, what? No one cares. They want to know, can I see the doctor I like? Will this help me pay for my prescriptions? What's my monthly premium payment, right? Like, that's what people care about. So my question is always going to be, where does this meet people where they live and breathe? So if you're talking to, you're sending an email to your colleagues, you're talking to your family at dinner, after you've gotten real clear about that deepest, most important truth, you then got to really think about your audience and like, where are they living and breathing this? So I often did a lot of research into my audiences before I wrote a speech, because I wanted to know, okay, if it's a commencement speech, okay, what's this graduating class dealing with? Who are they? Where are they from? Where are they going? I really wanted to be able to reach them where they are. It doesn't change what you say, but it can sometimes change how you say it, the way you intend to say it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a Jewish idea, right? You're not supposed to speak in, at a place where you won't be heard. But if you're going to be heard, you have to be really careful with those words. So before I go on to my next question, can I ask you something from the audience? Because there are so many.
Of course, please. I would love that.
Somebody said, how did it go during the editing process of your book? She says, I get narcissistic sometimes about writing. How did you let go of what you loved, but your editor didn't?
It's a great question. Oh man, this is a whole, so, editing, getting edits from other people, that is like probably, I would say 50% of the process of speech writing. You have to remember, when you're a speechwriter, this isn't about you. This is about, number one, channeling someone else and making sure it's in their voice, but then it's about getting edits. We used to spend in the Obama White House, I would send speeches for the first lady out to maybe 40 or 50 people in the White House. For the president, it was 70 or 80, because it was fact checkers, policy experts, lawyers, all these people were scrubbing it, and we would often get edits from them. And you have to, as a writer, you always have this instinct to fight someone. It's like, this is my baby, this is my darling. No, you're wrong, you don't get it. But you've got to just like kind of tamp down that instinct and really ask yourself, okay, could this make my writing better? And it's easy sometimes to get an edit where like the edit itself isn't quite right, where they're suggesting you write something in a different way, but they're actually, so their suggestion isn't right, but they're actually picking up on a problem that you need to solve. So as sort of, I would always go back to people and I'd say, okay, what's the real problem you're trying to solve here? What's actually wrong with it? And they'd say, well, I think you need to mention this policy. And I'd say like, oh, okay, I can do that in a sentence rather than the 20 pages that you just suggested. So I think, really trying to make yourself open to edits. I think it's always worth just try implementing the edit. Just try it. If you don't like it, you can delete it, but just try it and see how it turns out. And it just might be better.
Okay, Sarah, there's a lot of questions here
Great.
About politics.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing. So I'm going to sort of skew these questions into my own question. You'll forgive me, everybody who's written in. Everybody wants to know about Obama policy and think about that, because I'm assuming that most of our viewers assume that if you write a speech for someone, that you concur with their point of view. This does not to ask you whether you did or didn't with Michelle or Barack Obama. It's none of my business, and it's nobody's. But when you have to write a speech for somebody, or in a situation where you're not in alignment, does the speechwriter have any room to influence through the way it's written?
Yeah, so this is a question that I often get. And, I wrote for the president for a year and a half or so. I wrote for Mrs. Obama most of my time in the White House. And I will tell you, they say, well, what if you disagree with the person you write for? And my answer is I don't. I actually only write for people whose values I share. That's just, I'm not, I know that when I'm helping someone with their speaking, I'm helping them to support certain causes and promote certain policies and ideas. And if I don't agree with those, I'm not doing it.
Wow.
Not
That's
comfortable.
Right.
So I have to agree with them. Now look, were there times when I maybe disagreed with how they wanted to say something? Sure. And in those cases, they expected me to speak up. And I would, right? They want, they don't like, the Obamas don't like yes people. They want to be kind of pushed back on. So I might say, listen, sir, Mrs. Obama, what about this? I'm worried about that. And they would often be like, oh, okay, that's a good point. And plenty of times they would say like, okay, I appreciate that, but I disagree. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. And I will tell you, they were almost always right. In fact, I remember, I just have many memories of me hearing them actually speak at the podium and thinking, yeah, that was better. I was wrong. Because look, they know what it feels like at the podium. So that's important. But there are, and you'll find that this is true of most political speechwriters. This is just something we share. Although I once worked for a guy who he agreed with his boss on every issue but the death penalty. He was against the death penalty. She was for it. And they actually worked out an agreement by which if she ever spoke about that, she was on her own. He wouldn't do it. I think you can do that with maybe one small issue, but it gets a little tricky when it's like, okay, I disagree with you on the economy and healthcare. It's like, okay, maybe just don't take the job.
Oh, see, I did not realize that. I thought it was a much more objective thing like copywriting. I mean, many, many years ago, I copywrote for like a cosmetic company. And so this requires a certain amount of integrity.
It does. It really, and look, I think it's different. I think oftentimes after being in administration, people will go and they'll write for CEOs and things like that. And they, is that CEO a member of their same political party? No, I think I have friends now who are writing for CEOs who are Republicans, and that's okay, right? They don't have to, because the CEO isn't talking about politics. The CEO is talking about whatever it is the company does. And they think, well, that company is a good company making good products. I'm fine with that, right? So it's not like, I don't have to agree with the Obamas about art or sports or whatever, because that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about politics, and I do have to agree with them about that.
I want to add, yes, it's so interesting. And I think we could talk for another hour on this. I have so many other thoughts and questions on it, but, I don't want to take too much of your time. Just tell me something about presentation.
Yes.
Tips for presentation.
So the most important thing, and this goes back to speak in your own voice, you gotta put it in your own voice. So when you're actually practicing a presentation, you should do what you did, actually, which is you should stand up and run through it and edit in real time. So speak it out loud. And if you're feeling like, I am giving a speech, it's not right. You gotta put it in your own voice. So you kind of wanna edit in real time as you go through. That's one tip. Another tip, if your notes or the script is on a piece of paper, like 8.5 by 11, only put the text on the top 2/3 of the page. Because if text is on the bottom of the page and you're reading like this, kind of swallowing my words now, and then I'm breaking eye contact, it's really very hard when you're doing this. You want to keep it higher up on the page. That's just a little trick of the trade. And finally, for delivery, it's important to write it in the format that's best for you. And people are oftentimes, they're using the wrong format. Some people, they want to do verbatim, and that works for them. Some people, bullet points are best. Some people, just an outline or a word on a page. You got to figure out your right format. Like if you're just feeling like, me trying to deliver this verbatim, it feels awkward, then you know what, try a different format. People often ask about memorization. I don't recommend that. I think that's very tough and time consuming. If you have a great memory, maybe, but I think that's tough. I generally don't recommend people try to memorize stuff. It's just too much pressure.
This is so powerful. Somebody just wrote in the chat, Lisa Wallace said that I teach executive presentation skills and I never heard the 2/3 rule. Brilliant.
Oh.
So somebody just asked me, what year did you start becoming interested in being Jewish?
It was 2014, I believe. I think that's right. 2014. Yes, that's when it was, 6 years ago.
I have to say that, you're a big Kiddush Hashem, you're a sanctifier of the name of God. I just like all Jews, I love the fact that you worked for famous people because, I remember sitting with my father, may he rest in peace, and we'd watch some movie and he'd go, that guy's a Jew and that guy's a Jew and that guy's a Jew. It's like,
I do that too, of course.
So I love knowing that a Jewish woman had such a powerful role in the world, and I'm grateful for what you're willing to share with others. You have a generosity of spirit, and I'm sure it was there even before. But as somebody else who started my journey at 40 years old to fall in love with being Jewish and use it, and you were obviously younger than me, I feel a kinship to you and I adore you. So I want to thank you so
Right back at there, my friends. I adore, I think what you're doing with Momentum is great. And by the way, there are discussion guides on my website, sarahhurwitz.net, because what you're doing in building community, that's what I want to do with my book. I want people to read it with others in community, even if it's just with your husband, that's fine. Just read it together, share.
Maybe,
like we need to build community now.
You know what, Sarah, maybe we'll do a Momentum book club on your book.
Great. I would love to join that. That would be so fun.
Well, sweetheart, thank you so much for joining us today. And to all of you out in Momentum Land, thank you, thank you, thank you. And